Hello and welcome. We're the team at Vendor Society, and we're sharing bite-sized vendor tips and ideas in our interview series. I'm Katy, the Senior Content Manager at Vendor Society and eCommerce Nurse. I'm here with Georgina Saxby, our Senior Client Success Manager. Today, we're discussing a vendor basic. What is the benefit of a vendor manager, and how can you get the most out of your relationship with Amazon? Georgina is actually a former EU and UK vendor manager, so she's the ideal person to discuss this topic with. I'm going to ask her a few quick questions to give you an overview of vendor management from the Amazon perspective. Welcome, Georgina.
Thanks, Katy.
So first question, Amazon manages its vendors through teams of vendor managers spread out among the categories of Amazon. Whereas Amazon used to give vendors a lot more personal attention, the relationship seems to have changed in recent years. Can you tell us a little bit about what a typical vendor manager relationship looks like these days? And does every vendor get one?
So first of all, it's much more rare to have a vendor manager relationship these days, as I'm sure everyone listening will be aware. No, not every vendor does get one. And depending on the country and depending on the category, it can be even more rare to get one. So for example, in the US, you have to have a very, very large business size to even stand a chance of getting a vendor manager. So a typical vendor manager relationship these days is actually fairly similar to what it used to be like, but with slightly less contact. So it would be unlikely that you would have regular meetings, for example, but you would have access to email contact with the vendor manager. And the best part of having a vendor manager relationship, other than escalating any issues that you encounter with your products or just in general working with Amazon, is that you'll be the first to hear from them of any events, deals, new features that Amazon are launching, etc. So really one of the key parts that I think of having a vendor manager relationship is the deals. So anytime Amazon's running like Prime Day or Black Friday, the invites that you would get participate in those deals are pretty key. So that, and also having just a point of contact, any issues.
Definitely seems like it could be a real benefit at times. So how does Amazon assign vendor managers? Is it a certain size of business, or does it just kind of depend? And if yours moves or leaves, are you automatically assigned another one? Lastly, do you get, or should you get, a different vendor manager for every locale, or does it just depend?
So this really depends on a lot of factors. Again, it will depend on the category of product and the country that you're in. So Amazon will assign vendor managers completely internally. There's no way that you would be able to find out if you had one unless they reached out to you at some point, which they would always do via your primary email address on Vendor Central. So always make sure that's kept up to date if you think you're in with a chance of being invited to have a vendor manager at some point. If your vendor manager moves or leaves, you are not necessarily automatically assigned another one. However, if you are a very large business and you do have a strong relationship with Amazon, the chances are that you would be reached out to pretty soon by the replacement. But other clients we've seen have to wait a long time, if ever, for the next person to reach out to them. So just really depends there. And then on the locale part of the question, typically you would get a different vendor manager for every locale. Sometimes there are categories where they'll combine it from an EU level. More often than not, you would have one for each locale, and that would depend also on the size of your business. So if you're very small in Germany, probably won't have a vendor manager in Germany, but you might have one.
Okay, interesting. What are the main things a vendor manager can help you with? Should you reach out to them often, or should you still rely on vendor support for smaller issues and kind of save the big questions for your vendor manager?
The vendor manager should be seen kind of like as a strategic manager. So they can help you with anything strategy based. So that would be like deals, any escalations that you have on smaller issues. So I would always say best where you can use vendor support for small issues, because if you bombard your vendor manager with too many small issues, they might just start to ignore you. So save the big questions for them for sure, but also don't hesitate to escalate things that you've already tried hard to resolve outside of that. And I would say once a month or so, it's good to reach out to the vendor manager to make sure they're still thinking about you, ask if there's any deal opportunities, things like that. And they're also a great person to speak to if you do have any cost price increases. They are the ones that can approve them and can get things through internally. So that's a big plus of having a vendor manager, negotiating your terms and your cost prices.
Great. That definitely makes sense. Is there a way to get more help and more out of your vendor manager if you need it? Does your catalog size or advertising spend impact the level of personal attention? Have you seen anything like that?
I would say typically in the past, your overall COGS and revenue will be what impacts your level of personal attention and also your profitability. You might notice that you get a lot more attention if you're unprofitable for Amazon, which isn't good, but that sometimes does happen. So I would say just keep in touch with them once a month or so, escalate any issues, try and keep it concise. They do get a lot of emails. So if you can consolidate into one email, that's always helpful for them. And then for catalog size, they are measured also on selection. So new products. If you are looking to launch a lot of new products, sometimes that does help too. It's worth mentioning that to them. And advertising spend would feed into the overall profitability and revenue of your account. So yes, I would say that does impact your level of attention.
Is it possible to meet in person with your vendor manager? And is there any last tips you have for getting the most out of the Amazon vendor relationship?
Sometimes it is possible. It's been a long time since I've heard of someone having an in-person meeting with their vendor manager. I have seen a lot more calls now than in-person meetings. So if you are a large account based in the US, you will get a lot more attention from your vendor manager with calls. But I would not expect to have an in-person meeting with your vendor manager, just to be on the safe side. And any last tip for getting the most out of them, really just make sure that you keep in touch and count yourself lucky for having one. It's what everyone's after, and it can be really helpful to your business.
Great. Sounds good. Thanks so much for sharing that information about vendor manager and the Amazon vendor relationship.
Thank you for listening to the Vendor Society interview series by eCommerce Nurse. We are a boutique agency specialising in account management, marketing and consulting for vendors and sellers on Amazon. For more interviews, roundtables, blogs and information about all our services, visit vendorsociety.com and ecommercenurse.com.